I stood frozen amidst the glitz of the Aurelia Grand Hall, my hand trembling around a flute of champagne while my husband reduced my existence to a punchline for his billionaire friends. As the humiliation burned, a stranger whispered 4 words that woke me up. "You deserve better." What none of them knew was that my jeweled clutch did not hold lipstick, but a USB drive ready to burn his empire to the ground. My name is Elena, and tonight I was standing inside a diamond-encrusted cage. The air within the Aurelia Grand Hall was thick with the scent of imported white lilies and the metallic tang of ambition. It was the 10th anniversary gala of Vanguard Dynamics, the real estate technology empire that now stood as a titan in the industry. Beside me stood Marcus, my husband, the man the world saw as a visionary genius. He looked the part of the American dream in his bespoke tuxedo, his teeth gleaming under the chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a decade. I stood there at 34 years old, draped in silk that felt heavy against my skin, smiling until my jaw ached. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. While Marcus accepted the adoration of the city's elite, I drifted in his shadow, a silent accessory to his brilliance. It had not always been this way, but memory was a dangerous thing to indulge in tonight. Then there was Sienna, my best friend of 15 years and the creative director of Vanguard. She stood on Marcus's other side, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, her hand lingering on his forearm a few seconds longer than professional courtesy required. She looked radiant, projecting the image of the indispensable partner, while I was relegated to the role of the trophy wife. I watched them, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes, but I maintained my composure. Marcus was in the middle of a monologue about our latest skyscraper project, his voice booming with unearned confidence. The board members nodded like bobbleheads, mesmerized by his charisma. "The structural integration of the AI systems was a nightmare," Marcus said, gesturing broadly with his whiskey glass. "But I told the team that failure was not an option. We had to rewrite the entire architectural blueprint to accommodate the servers." A silver-haired investor turned his gaze toward me. It was Mr. Sterling, one of the few men in the room who actually remembered the early days. "Elena," Mr. Sterling said warmly, "I recall you were the one who drafted the initial load-bearing concepts for the chaotic terrain. What do you think about the new seismic dampeners they installed?" For a brief second, a spark lit up inside me. This was my language. This was my art. I opened my mouth to speak, ready to discuss the tensile strength and the fluid dynamics of the dampeners. "Actually, the dampeners were—" I began. "Oh, come now, Arthur." Marcus cut across me, his voice slicing through the air like a whip. He did not look at me, but his hand clamped down on my shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. The small circle of billionaires fell silent. Marcus chuckled, a low, condescending sound that echoed in the sudden quiet. "Don't ask my wife about structural integrity or zoning laws. It's far too complicated for her pretty little head. Elena here. She only excels at 2 things: spending the money I make on designer bags and napping at the spa." The silence stretched for a heartbeat. And then they laughed. It was a polite, sycophantic ripple of laughter that tore through my dignity. They were laughing at me, my husband, the man I had built this company with from the ground up in a roach-infested apartment, had just reduced my entire existence to that of a parasitic consumer. I stood frozen, the blood drained from my face. I could feel Sienna's gaze on me, not of pity, but of triumphant mockery masked as concern. I forced the corners of my mouth up, but inside, something vital shattered. I was standing on the precipice of a breakdown, my breath catching in my throat. A waiter appeared at my elbow to refill my champagne flute. He was an older man with silver hair and kind, weary eyes. His name tag read Elias. As he leaned in to pour the golden liquid, he paused. The surrounding crowd was too busy toasting Marcus's wit to notice us. Elias looked at me, his eyes piercing through my mask of composure. He lowered his head and whispered, his voice a rough rasp that only I could hear. "You deserve better than this, ma'am." The words hit me harder than the insult. They were a bucket of ice water on a sleeping drunk. I blinked, looking at the waiter, but he had already straightened up and melted back into the shadows of the service staff. "You deserve better." The shame that had been threatening to drown me evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. The trembling in my hands ceased. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not the man I loved, but a stranger who had been cannibalizing my soul for a decade. I shifted my grip on my clutch. It was a small, jeweled thing, worth $5,000. Marcus thought it contained lipstick and a compact mirror for my vanity. He did not know that nestled inside the velvet lining was a sleek, silver USB drive. It contained forensic accounting records, stolen emails, and the blueprints he had plagiarized. It contained the end of his world. My eyes dried. The heat in my chest turned to ice. Tonight was not just a party. It was a funeral for his career, and I was the one who would deliver the eulogy. The waiter's words echoed in my mind, drowning out the applause surrounding my husband. "You deserve better." That sentence dragged me back 10 years, pulling me away from the Aurelia Grand Hall and dropping me into the suffocating heat of a 400-square-foot apartment in Queens. I remembered the smell of that place, a mixture of stale coffee, instant noodles, and the graphite from my pencils. Back then, Vanguard Dynamics was nothing but a stack of sketches on a second-hand drafting table and a dream that kept us awake until 3 in the morning. I was the one hunched over the paper, my fingers stained gray, calculating load-bearing walls and wind resistance for buildings that only existed in my imagination. It was my hand that drew the Helix Tower, the design that eventually put us on the map. Marcus was on the phone. He was pacing the stained carpet, selling my vision with a confidence he had no right to possess. He could not draw a straight line to save his life, but he could make people believe he built the pyramids. It started slowly, the erasure of my name. It was a subtle, creeping poison. I remembered the night we landed our first major contract. I was reaching for my blazer to join him at the signing, and Marcus had stopped me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. "Babe, look at you," he had said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You haven't slept in 48 hours. Your eyes are red. Let me handle the sharks. You're the artist. You're too pure for the boardroom. Let me protect you from that." I had believed him. I thought he was my shield. I stayed home that night, and he came back as the CEO. Over the years, the narrative shifted. Whenever I tried to offer input on new projects, he would smile that condescending smile, the same one he was wearing right now on stage. "Elena, honey," he would say during dinner, swirling his wine. "That idea is a bit emotional, isn't it? Business is cold. You're too soft. Why don't you focus on the house or go shopping with Sienna?" So I did. I retreated into the role he curated for me. We moved to High Garden, a neighborhood of manicured lawns and gates that locked the world out. I lived in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. I drove the cars he bought, attended the charity galas he approved, and became the silent, smiling doll on his arm. It was a golden cage, and I had walked into it willingly, handing him the key because I trusted him. I trusted Sienna, too. That was the bitterest pill to swallow. I looked at her now, standing just a few feet away from him. For years, she had been my confidant. When Marcus started taking those urgent business trips to Dubai and London, leaving me alone in a 6-bedroom house for weeks, I had cried on her shoulder. I remembered sitting in her office just 6 months ago, sobbing because Marcus had changed his phone password for the 3rd time that month. "He feels so distant, Sienna," I had choked out, wiping tears from my cheeks. "I feel like I'm losing him." Sienna had poured me a cup of tea, her face a mask of sympathy. "Oh, Elena, you need to stop this. Marcus is under immense pressure building the empire for you. If you keep nagging him about passwords and schedules, you're going to drive him away. You need to be supportive, not suffocating. Suffocating. She had made me feel guilty for my own intuition. I blinked, the memory dissolving as the applause in the ballroom swelled again. I watched them. Marcus leaned in to whisper something to Sienna, and for a split second, their professional masks slipped. It was a look of intimacy, a shared secret, a smirk that said they were partners in something far deeper than business. They weren't just colleagues. They were accomplices. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had been the architect of this company, but they had been the architects of my misery. I had spent a decade building a throne for a king who treated me like a peasant, and my best friend had been cheering him on the entire time. My grip on my clutch tightened until my knuckles turned white. The sadness that had plagued me for months evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard rage. I was done being the supportive wife. I was done being the emotional artist. If they wanted to play games with my life, they were about to learn that I was the one who designed the board. The unraveling of my marriage did not begin with a lipstick stain on a collar or the lingering scent of cheap perfume. It started 3 months ago with a clerical error. A supplementary credit card statement, usually routed directly to Marcus's office, had been delivered to our home mailbox by mistake. I remembered standing in the foyer, the paper trembling in my hand as I stared at a single-line item. It was a charge of $12,000 to a boutique called Le Petit Cradle. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Le Petit Cradle was the most exclusive nursery furniture store in the city. We did not have children. We were not trying for children. Marcus had always said he was too busy for a family. I did not confront him. Instead, I let the architect in me take over. I treated this mystery like a structural flaw in a building. I needed to find the stress point. The next morning, I walked into the boutique dressed in my sharpest blazer, projecting the efficient aura of an executive assistant. "Good morning," I said to the sales associate, keeping my voice brisk. "I am calling on behalf of Mr. Sterling. He wanted to ensure the delivery address for the walnut crib and changing table was updated correctly. He is very particular about privacy." The associate tapped on her keyboard, eager to please a VIP client. "Of course, we have the delivery scheduled for tomorrow at the Obsidian on River Walk, Penthouse 42B. Is that correct?" "Perfect." I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Thank you." The Obsidian. It was a brand new ultra-luxury development. I sat in my car and pulled up the public records on my tablet. The penthouse was listed under a shell company, Phoenix Holdings LLC. Most wives would have hit a dead end there, but I knew how buildings worked. I knew that while ownership could be hidden, renovation permits were public record. I accessed the city's Department of Buildings database and searched for recent filing permits for that specific unit. There it was. A permit for soundproofing and structural reinforcement, signed off by the owner's representative, Marcus Sterling. He had bought a home. A secret home. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place thanks to sheer technological laziness. Years ago, we had bundled our car insurance to get a premium discount. Marcus had installed the provider's safety app on his phone and then promptly forgotten about it. I opened the app on my phone. It tracked every trip, every hard break, and every stop. For the last month. His car had been pinging at the Riverwalk location 3 times a week. On a Tuesday evening, Marcus kissed me on the cheek, adjusting his tie. "I have to meet the Japanese investors for dinner," he said smoothly. "The negotiation is going to run late, so—" "Don't wait up." "Good luck," I said, my voice steady. 30 minutes later, I was parked across the street from the Obsidian. I watched the dot on my phone screen come to a halt. His car was in the garage. I sat there in the dark for 4 hours. My hands were freezing, but I refused to turn on the heater. I needed the cold to keep me sharp. At 11 o'clock at night, the lobby doors opened. I raised my camera, the telephoto lens zooming in with mechanical precision. Marcus walked out. He was not alone. Sienna was with him. They were not behaving like colleagues discussing a merger. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist. They stopped under the awning, bathing in the soft glow of the streetlights. I snapped the shutter, capturing the way he looked at her, a look of adoration he had not given me in years. Then, Sienna did something that made the bile rise in my throat. She stopped walking and placed her hand gently over her lower abdomen. She looked up at Marcus and smiled, a soft, maternal smile. Marcus covered her hand with his and kissed her forehead. The camera clicked, freezing the moment in time. They were not just having an affair. They were building a life. They were building a family in a penthouse bought with our money, filled with furniture for a baby they were planning to replace me with. I lowered the camera, staring at the digital image of my best friend rubbing her belly. The pain was blinding, but underneath it, the plan for their destruction began to take shape. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, tears are a depreciating asset. I knew that if I confronted Marcus with screaming and sobbing, I would be labeled hysterical, medicated by his doctors, and silenced with a non-disclosure agreement. I did not want an apology. I wanted leverage. I wanted to dismantle him with the same precision I used to design skyscrapers. The opportunity arrived 2 nights later. Marcus stumbled through the front door at 2 a.m, reeking of aged scotch and Sienna's perfume. He collapsed onto our bed without even loosening his tie. I waited in the armchair in the corner, watching his chest rise and fall until his breathing deepened into the heavy rhythm of a drunkard's sleep. I walked over to the bed. His iPad Pro was on the nightstand. Marcus was arrogant. He believed he was untouchable, so he never changed his biometric settings. I gently took his right hand, the hand that had signed our marriage license, and pressed his thumb against the sensor. The screen unlocked instantly. I did not look at his text messages. I went straight to the Vanguard Dynamics cloud server. I logged in using the administrator access he thought I had forgotten about years ago. I typed Phoenix into the search bar, recalling the name of the shell company I had found on the penthouse deed. A hidden folder appeared, Project Phoenix. I opened it, and the screen illuminated the dark room with the evidence of a crime in progress. It was not a development project. It was a systematic siphoning of company assets. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet detailed wire transfers. $2 million here, $500,000 there, all disguised as consulting fees or material procurement costs paid to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. All the accounts were linked to a single beneficiary, Sienna. My eyes scanned the screen, cold and dry. Then I found the correspondence folder. There were emails between Marcus and his personal attorney. "We need to accelerate the transfer of the liquidity," Marcus had written. "Elena is becoming a bore. She is useless, just a dead weight eating into my profits. Once the assets are moved, I will file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. I want her to leave with nothing but the clothes on her back." Useless. The word burned, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. Then I saw something that made my breath hitch. It was a subfolder labeled New Concepts. I opened a file titled The Azure Horizon. It was my design. It was a sketch I had drawn 3 weeks ago at the kitchen table, just for fun, while Marcus watched television. I had left it in my sketchbook. He had photographed it, digitized it, and filed the copyright application yesterday. The applicant's name was Sienna. You thief," I whispered into the silence of the room. He wasn't just stealing our money. He was stealing my mind. He was stripping me of my intellectual identity to build a pedestal for his mistress. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a high-capacity flash drive. I plugged it into the iPad. For the next hour, I copied everything. Every fraudulent tax return, every illicit bank transfer, every degrading email, and the metadata of my stolen designs. I was not just gathering evidence for a divorce. I was building a federal indictment. The next morning, I sat in a dimly lit office in downtown, across from a man named Mr. Vance. He was a forensic accountant and a shark of a divorce lawyer. I had made the appointment under the name Ms. Davis. I slid the flash drive across the mahogany desk. Mr. Vance plugged it in, his face illuminated by the glow of his monitor. He clicked through the files for 10 minutes in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted from professional boredom to predatory interest. "Ms. Davis," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If these documents are authentic, we are not looking at a simple division of assets. This is grand larceny. This is tax evasion. This is prison time." "I don't want a settlement," I said, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. "I want total annihilation." "You have enough here to bury him," Mr. Vance replied, tapping a finger on the desk. "But you have to be careful. If he knows you have this, he will try to destroy it. Or you—" "He won't know," I said. "Not until it is too late." I left the office and drove straight to a computer store. I bought a new, encrypted laptop. That night, locked in my home studio, I began to work. I did not open AutoCAD or Revit. I opened presentation software. I began to assemble the slides. Slide 1 was the financial graph of the stolen funds. Slide 2 was the photo of Sienna at the penthouse. Slide 3 was the copyright theft. It was going to be the most important presentation of my life. I saved the file with a benign name, copied it to the jeweled USB drive I planned to carry in my clutch, and shut the laptop. I was ready. Marcus wanted a show at his gala. I would give him one he would never forget. 7 days before the gala, Marcus walked into our bedroom with a thin, rectangular velvet box. He stood behind me at the vanity, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror, and placed a diamond necklace around my throat. It was heavy, a cold weight of platinum and stones that must have cost at least $80,000. "For you," he said, his voice smooth like oil. "I want you to shine next week. You need to stand next to me as a symbol of our prosperity. The investors need to see that success suits us." I touched the cold metal. A week ago, I might have cried at his generosity. Now, I knew what this was. It was a prop. I was being decorated like a prize poodle for a dog show. "It is beautiful, Marcus," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you." 2 days later, Sienna came over to help me choose my gown. We stood in my walk-in closet, surrounded by silk and chiffon. She bypassed the vibrant colors and the modern cuts, pulling out a drab, beige dress with a high neckline and long sleeves. It was a dress for a woman 20 years my senior. "Oh, Elena, this is the one," Sienna gushed, holding it up against me. "It is so dignified. You don't want to look like you are trying too hard, do you? You should look like the supportive, modest wife. Leave the flashiness to the young interns." I looked at the dress. It was hideous. It would wash out my complexion and make me disappear into the wallpaper, exactly as she intended. "You are right, Sienna," I said, widening my eyes innocently. "I should stay in the background. Marcus is the star, after all." The moment she left, I picked up my phone and called a private designer I had worked with years ago on a charity project. "I need a dress," I told him. "Deep red, burgundy, something that screams power, and I need it in 3 days. Money is no object." That evening at dinner, I decided to test the waters. I pushed my salad around the plate, looking up at Marcus through my lashes. "Marcus, I was thinking," I started tentatively. "Since the company is doing so well, maybe we should look into updating the portfolio. I saw some interesting properties in—" He slammed his fork down. "Elena, stop. You have no idea what you are talking about. The company is not doing well. We are bleeding cash. The market is volatile. I am fighting tooth and nail just to keep us afloat." "But the gala," I asked, putting a tremor in my voice. "It is all for show," he snapped. "We have to project strength to get the loans we need. If this quarter does not turn around, we might have to file for bankruptcy. So do not expect a big settlement if things go south. There is no money to take." It was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. He was setting the stage to leave me destitute. Later that night, I went to the guest bathroom but stopped when I heard a voice. Sienna was in there. She must have stayed for a drink with Marcus while I was upstairs. Through the door, I heard her giggling on the phone. Yes, of course I am sure, Sienna said. He is announcing the restructuring next month. The wife gets cut loose, and I move into the penthouse. Finally, I will be the official hostess. No more hiding. I stood in the hallway. I waited for the heartbreak, for the tears, for the crushing weight of betrayal, but nothing came. Instead, a wave of pure revulsion washed over me. I did not love him anymore. I did not even hate him. I looked at them as one looks at cockroaches scurrying across a clean floor pests that needed to be exterminated. The next morning, I drove to the Aurelia Grand Hall. I found the event director, a frantic man named David who was buried under a pile of seating charts. "Mrs. Sterling," he exclaimed. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, David," I said, flashing my most charming smile. Marcus wanted me to convey a small change for the presentation segment. He wants to surprise the board with a special tribute to the company's history. I have the updated media files here. I handed him a dummy drive with some old photos, but I kept the real weapon, the jeweled USB safe, in my pocket. "Just slot this into the queue right after his opening remarks," I instructed. "He wants to be a surprise, so do not tell him. He wants to see the look on everyone's faces." "Of course," David said, relieved to have direction from the top. "Consider it done." On the night before the event, I sat alone in my bedroom. The house was quiet. Marcus was working late again. I picked up the clutch I would carry tomorrow. I slid the silver USB drive into the small inner pocket. It clicked into place with a satisfying sound. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the naive architect who had drawn sketches in a cramped apartment. She was not the submissive wife who hid in the shadows. That, Elena, was dead. The woman in the mirror was cold, sharp, and dangerous. "You wanted a show, Marcus," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope you are ready for the finale." The waiter named Elias disappeared into the sea of black tuxedos, but the 4 words he left behind continued to vibrate in the air around me. "You deserve better." I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the chilled, conditioned air of the ballroom. It tasted different now. It no longer tasted like suffocation. It tasted like ozone before a storm. I straightened my spine, letting the heavy silk of my burgundy gown settle around me like armor. The submissive, smiling wife who had stood here 5 minutes ago was gone. In her place stood the woman who had designed the foundations of this very empire. I turned my back on the circle of sycophants who were still laughing at my expense and walked purposefully toward the balcony doors. Standing there were the founding shareholders, men in their 70s who cared more about architectural integrity than stock prices. They were the ones who had respected my work before Marcus erased my name. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice clear and confident as I approached the group. "I was looking at the structural reports for the Midtown project. The tensile stress on the north-facing wall is concerning. Don't you think—" Mr. Henderson looked at me, surprised by the sudden shift from the vapid trophy wife he had seen all evening. His eyes lit up. "Elena, by God, I was just saying that. Marcus insists it is fine, but the wind shear calculations are off by 12%. I finished for him. I have some ideas on how to reinforce the truss system without compromising the aesthetic." For the next few minutes, I was in my element. I was commanding the conversation. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus stiffen. He had noticed. He excused himself from his admirers and marched toward me, his smile fixed, but his eyes hard with irritation. He reached out to grab my elbow, a possessive gesture meant to steer me back into my designated corner of silence. "Elena," he said, his voice low and threatening under the noise of the crowd, "you are boring the investors. Come with me. You need to—" I stepped to the side before his fingers could graze my skin. It was a smooth, fluid motion that left his hand grasping at empty air. I looked at him, not with fear, but with the cool detachment of a stranger observing a peculiar insect. I am perfectly fine. Marcus, I said, my tone pleasant but icy. Mr. Henderson and I were just discussing business. Real business. Before he could respond, Sienna materialized beside him. She was wearing a dress that was too tight and too bright, desperate for attention. She placed a hand on his chest and then turned to me, flashing a smile that did not reach her eyes. She raised her left hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, deliberately displaying a massive canary yellow diamond ring on her finger. I froze for a split second. It was the exact custom setting Marcus had sketched on a napkin for our 5th anniversary. He had told me then that it was too expensive to make. "Oh, Elena," Sienna purred, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You look so tired. Maybe you should sit down, Marcus, darling. Perhaps she needs some water." I looked at the ring, then at her. "That is a beautiful ring. Sienna, it looks very familiar. Do you like it?" she asked, preening. "It is a little gift to myself, a reward for hard work." I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. "Careful, Sienna," I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Sharp, sparkly things are beautiful, but if you hold them too tight, they tend to cut you, and they cause a lot of bleeding." Her smile faltered. Before she could reply, the chandeliers dimmed, the heavy velvet curtains on the stage parted, and the spotlight hit the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice booming over the speakers, "please welcome the visionary, the man of the hour, the CEO of Vanguard Dynamics, Mr. Marcus Sterling." Marcus shot me one last warning glare, adjusted his cufflinks, and strode toward the stage. He stepped into the light, bathing in the applause. I watched him take the microphone, his face arranging itself into a mask of humble gratitude. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I stand here tonight not just as a businessman, but as a man who values two things above all else, family and absolute honesty. Without trust, we have nothing." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The crowd clapped, mesmerized by his performance. While their eyes were glued to the lyre on the stage, I began to move. I did not head for the exit or the restrooms. I moved quietly along the shadowed edge of the ballroom, my heels silent on the carpet, heading toward the back of the room. My destination was the audio-visual control booth. Inside, a young technician named Kevin was waiting. I had saved Kevin's job 2 years ago when Marcus wanted to fire him for a minor mistake. Tonight, Kevin was going to help me return the favor. I clutched my jeweled bag tighter, feeling the hard edges of the USB drive through the silk. The show was about to start, and I was the director. Marcus stood at the podium, his face flushed with the intoxication of his own applause. He raised a hand to silence the room, a benevolent king addressing his subjects. He gestured vaguely toward the table where he thought I was still sitting. "And finally," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "I must thank the person who keeps the home fires burning while I conquer the world. She may not understand the intricacies of high finance or the heavy burden of leadership, but my wife, Elena, is my rock." The crowd prepared to clap politely, but I was not at the table. I stepped out from the stage wings, the sudden movement catching Marcus off guard. I was not walking with the hesitant, shuffling gait he was used to. I strode to the center of the stage, gripping my own microphone, my burgundy dress catching the spotlight like spilled wine. "Thank you, Marcus, my love," I said, my voice cutting through the air and overpowering his. "But I think tonight, instead of empty platitudes, we should discuss something more tangible. Let us talk about the real numbers rather than the fairy tales you have been selling." Marcus froze. His eyes widened, shifting from confusion to panic. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched to snatch my microphone. "Elena, what are you doing? Give me that," he hissed, his charming mask slipping. I sidestepped him with the grace of a matador, moving just out of his reach. I looked up toward the control booth and gave a sharp nod. "Now, Kevin," I commanded. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the Vanguard Dynamics logo in triumphant gold, flickered once. The logo vanished. In its place, a stark, high-contrast title slide appeared in aggressive red letters: Actual Financial Solvency Report and Project Phoenix. A collective gasp tore through the ballroom. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room at once. Somewhere in the front row, the sound of shattering glass pierced the silence. Sienna had dropped her champagne flute, the crystal exploding on the floor just as her composure shattered. I turned to the audience. I did not look at Marcus. I looked at the board members, the investors, and the employees. I channeled every ounce of professional competence I had suppressed for a decade. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and cold. "If you look at the screen, you will see the fiscal report for the third quarter. The CEO claims we are in a deficit due to market volatility. However, the data tells a different story." I clicked the remote clicker concealed in my hand. The slide changed. It showed a complex web of wire transfers, highlighting specific dates and amounts in bold. On August 15th, a transfer of $250,000 was made to a vendor listed as consulting services. On September 1st, another transfer of $400,000, I explained, pointing to the figures. These funds did not go to contractors. They were routed to personal accounts. The next slide flashed up. It was a collage of receipts. Hotel invoices for 5-star suites in Paris, receipts for designer handbags, and a bill for a $60,000 diamond necklace, the very one currently resting on Sienna's neck. Not mine. "Cut the feed!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. He waved his arms frantically at the control booth. "Kevin, turn it off. Turn it off right now, or you are fired. High above us." Kevin sat motionless behind the glass, his arms crossed over his chest. He was not touching the console. I had shown Kevin the termination notice Marcus had drafted for him just yesterday, and that loyalty had been severed. "He cannot hear you, Marcus," I said calmly. I advanced a step toward the audience, pointing a manicured finger at the jagged red line plummeting on the graph behind me. "This is not a loss of profit," I declared, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a verdict. "This is $3 million that Marcus Sterling stole from the shareholders sitting right here in this room. And he did not spend it on the company. He spent it to build a secret nest for his mistress." I clicked the remote one last time, and the screen behind me shifted from the cold, hard evidence of financial fraud to the burning heat of personal betrayal. The image was massive, towering over the guests. It was the photograph I had taken outside the Riverwalk penthouse. It showed Marcus and Sienna standing under the streetlights, his hand resting tenderly on her stomach, their faces illuminated by a look of intimacy that he had not given me in a decade. Next to the photo, I projected the copyright documents for the Azure Horizon, the architectural masterpiece that was supposed to be the future of the company, signed clearly by Sienna. I lowered the microphone slightly and looked down at the floor where Sienna was trembling, her face pale against the dark carpet. "And you, Sienna," I said, my voice projecting to every corner of the silent room. "You are the creative director of this company, yet you cannot even draw a straight line without a ruler. That design on the screen is not yours. It is mine. You stole my husband. You stole my money. And then you tried to steal my mind." A sound like a wounded animal tore from Marcus's throat. His composure disintegrated completely. He abandoned his podium and charged across the stage toward me, his eyes wide with murderous intent. "You bitch," Marcus screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "I will kill you, shut it off." He was 5 feet away when 2 large men in black suits stepped out from the shadows of the curtains. They were not hotel security. They were private protection I had hired 3 days ago using the last of my personal savings. One of them caught Marcus by the shoulder and slammed him back, pinning his arms behind him. Marcus struggled, kicking and thrashing, but he was powerless. The shock in the room turned into a roar of outrage. Mr. Henderson, the senior board member, stood up, his face purple with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at the stage. "Is this true?" Mr. Henderson bellowed. "Sterling, answer her. Did you embezzle our funds?" "It is a lie," Marcus shrieked, struggling against the guard's grip. "She is crazy. She is jealous. Those are fake documents." "I thought you might say that," I said, cutting him off. "Which is why I have one final piece of evidence. You always said honesty was your core value. Marcus, let us hear what you really think about the people in this room." I signaled the booth. The speakers crackled, and then Marcus's voice filled the hall. It was crystal clear, recorded from the phone call I had intercepted weeks ago. "I am telling you, the board is a joke," Marcus's recorded voice sneered, the arrogance dripping from every syllable. "They are just a bunch of senile old men. They are easy to trick. I wave a shiny projection in front of them, and they sign the checks. They are not partners. They are wallets waiting to be picked." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Every single investor, every board member, every ally Marcus thought he had, stared at him with pure hatred. Marcus stopped struggling. His knees gave way, and he slumped in the guard's grip, his face draining of all color. He looked out at the sea of angry faces and opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was drowning in his own hubris. Down on the floor. Sienna saw the ship sinking and tried to abandon it. She scrambled to her feet, hiking up her dress to run toward the side exit. But the press had smelled blood. A wall of photographers and reporters who had been invited to cover a triumph now swarmed around her to capture a scandal. Flashes popped like gunfire, blinding her, trapping her in the center of the chaos she had helped create. I stood alone in the center of the stage. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of total victory. I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had called me useless, the man who was now broken at my feet. I felt like a goddess of vengeance, carved from ice and steel. I raised the microphone to my lips for the final time. I looked him dead in the eyes. "You were right about one thing, Marcus," I said softly, though my voice boomed through the speakers. "I do not understand your dirty business. I never did, but I understand exactly how to end it." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a violence that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. It was not the dramatic exit Marcus had planned for his evening, but rather the dramatic entrance of the Economic Crimes Unit. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, had been very efficient. He had timed the filing of the evidence perfectly to coincide with the gala ensuring maximum exposure. 4 officers in dark windbreakers strode down the center aisle, their faces grim and purposeful. They marched straight past the stunned investors and the trembling socialites, heading directly for the stage where my husband was still pinned by my security guards. "Marcus Sterling!" the lead officer barked, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, securities fraud, and tax evasion." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise in the room. It was a sharp, metallic finality that severed Marcus from his life of privilege. I watched as they hauled him up. His bespoke tuxedo, which cost $5,000, was now bunched up and wrinkled around his shoulders. His hair was a mess, and his face was a mask of sheer terror. "This is a mistake," Marcus screamed, thrashing against the officers. "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Vanguard Dynamics. You cannot touch me, Elena." "Elena, tell them." I stood motionless, watching him with cold indifference. He looked at me, begging with his eyes, but I offered him nothing. Meanwhile, A second team of officers had cornered Sienna near the emergency exit. She was no longer the smug mistress who had mocked my dress sense. She was a weeping mess, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. As the officer grabbed her wrist, she began to shriek, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "It was him!" Sienna wailed, her voice cracking. "I didn't do anything. He made me sign those papers. I am just an employee. Please, I am pregnant." "Tell it to the judge, ma'am," the officer said impassively, cuffing her hands behind her back. The sight of them, the golden couple of the evening now reduced to criminals being dragged away, sent a shockwave through the room. The crowd of guests, the same people who had laughed at Marcus's cruel joke about me less than an hour ago, were now silent. They turned their eyes toward me. I saw fear in their gazes. They were looking at me not as the discarded wife, but as the woman who had single-handedly orchestrated the execution of a titan. I placed the microphone back on the stand. I smoothed the skirt of my burgundy dress and descended the stairs from the stage. The crowd parted instantly. Men worth billions stepped back to give me a wide berth, terrified that they might be next on my list if they breathed too loudly. I walked through the corridor of people, my head held high, the sound of my heels rhythmic and steady on the floor. Near the entrance, standing by a tray of abandoned champagne flutes, was Elias. The older waiter was watching me, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He did not look afraid like the others. He looked proud. I stopped in front of him. The chaos of the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters outside was building, but in this small bubble, it was quiet. "Thank you," I said softly, looking him in the eyes. "You were right." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick white envelope. Inside was $10,000 in cash, money I had withdrawn earlier that day specifically for this moment. I took his hand and pressed the envelope into his palm. "For your retirement," I added. Elias looked at the envelope, then back at me, his eyes widening in shock. "Ma'am, I cannot—" "Take it," I insisted, closing his fingers over the paper. "You gave me my life back tonight. It is a fair trade." Without waiting for another word, I turned and walked through the main doors. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of rain and freedom. The paparazzi were a wall of blinding light and noise, shouting my name, asking for a statement, asking what had happened. I ignored them all. I walked through the storm of flashes, leaving the wreckage of Vanguard Dynamics behind me. The noise faded into the background, becoming nothing more than the soundtrack to my liberation. The night air outside the Aurelia Grand Hall was biting, but to me, it felt like the first breath of oxygen I had taken in 10 years. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the chaotic symphony of shouting reporters and police sirens. I stood on the curb, the adrenaline slowly fading into a profound, weightless sense of relief. It was over. The cage was not just open, I had melted the bars. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The rear window rolled down to reveal Mr. Vance, my lawyer. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, a tablet glowing in his hands. "It is done, Ms. Sterling, or should I say, Ms. Davis?" Mr. Vance asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "The judge granted the emergency asset freeze 5 minutes ago. All of Marcus's personal accounts, the offshore holdings, and the liquid assets of Vanguard Dynamics are locked down." I slid into the leather seat, closing the door on the noise outside. "And the prenup, ironclad, Mr. Vance chuckled, tapping the screen. "Marcus was so arrogant when he drafted it. He included a moral turpitude clause, assuming you would be the one to cheat or embarrass him. It states that in the event of proven infidelity or criminal fraud, the offending party forfeits their share of the marital assets to the victim. By trying to leave you with nothing, he effectively signed everything over to you." "File the divorce papers," I said, leaning back against the headrest and closing my eyes for a brief second. "Tonight. I want him to receive them while he is sitting in his holding cell." My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board. It read, "Elena, that was a revelation. The board is in emergency session. We want you back. Interim CEO and creative director. Name your salary. We need the person who actually designed the Helix Tower." I stared at the screen. A decade ago, I would have begged for this validation. I would have jumped at the chance to prove my worth to these men. But tonight, the hunger for their approval was gone. I was no longer the woman asking for a seat at the table. I was the one who owned the table. I typed a reply. "I will consider it, but it will be on my own terms, and the name of the company changes." I hit send and looked out the window. The Aurelia Grand Hall loomed above us, a glittering monument to vanity that had just become a tomb for my husband's ego and my best friend's betrayal. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond wedding band, the symbol of my perfect marriage, felt heavy and foreign on my finger. It did not represent love. It represented ownership, and I was no longer property. "Stop the car for a second," I told the driver. I opened the door and stepped out. There was a metal trash can bolted to the sidewalk, overflowing with discarded flyers and empty soda cups. I twisted the ring off my finger. It slid off easily, as if it had never really belonged there. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel loss. I dropped the ring into the trash. It landed with a dull clink against a discarded glass bottle. "Goodbye, Marcus," I whispered. I got back into the car. "Where to?" "Ma'am," the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Back to the mansion in Highgarden." "No," I said instantly. "Take me to East 42nd Street, the Loft Studio." "The studio. Ma'am, is that not in the old district?" "It is." I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. "It is where I started, and it is where I am going to build my own empire." As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of city lights, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The tired, fearful woman who had walked into the gala was gone. I did not need a stranger to whisper that I was worthy anymore. I did not need a title or a husband to define my value. I closed my eyes and let the city lights wash over me. I was finally free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.